The greatest generation describes those born in the first quarter of the last century, those whose young and formative years took place under the oppressive cloud of the First World War, a war that was unlike any that preceded it, a war that changed the face of the earth, a war, they said, that would bring an end to all wars. That generation then passed through the desert of the Great Depression. Afterwards, they experienced the Second World War, the bloodiest battle in history. Advances meant for human flourishing were instead used to bring about widespread destruction. This greatest generation, we might be able to say, was the result of, it was forged in, it was fortified by one of the darkest and most difficult eras. But it then went forward to produce one of the most prosperous periods. It is written that hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men create hard times create strong men, and, well, you get the point. Wash, rinse, repeat. The cycle of human generations going round and round and round endlessly. Even that greatest generation was couched in between the preceding lost generation and the succeeding silent generation. And what kind of times are we now living? Are they good or are they hard? And what of the men that comprise it? Are they strong or are they weak? Today is Pentecost. It is a feast that was celebrated by the ancient Jews in the Old Testament, as well as by the early Christians in the New. For the Jews, all of their feasts that were celebrated had a three-tiered or a three-leveled meaning, corresponding to the three interconnected relationships that govern the entirety of their lives. That first tier, that first level was agricultural. Its meaning, its representation was their relationship with the world around them. The second tier was historical, representing the relationship with their own past, the formation of their own identity. The third tier was theological, representing their relationship with God. Agriculturally, Pentecost celebrated the annual cycle, the annual completion of the wheat harvest. After the long oppressive cloud of waiting and worrying whether pestilence and drought would destroy their crops, wiping away an entire generation, they now, having that dark cloud behind them, the work done, the grains, the fruits safely secure, they can now enter into the good times of festivity. They can celebrate the freedom that they had now experienced. Historically, Pentecost represents a time in which those Jews passed through the desert and arrived at Mount Sinai. The more than 400 years of exile in Egypt, first as exiles and then as slaves, are now behind them. They arrived at the mount to receive the covenant written on tablets of stone. These 10 commandments that were now meant to govern their newfound freedom so that they don't return to the slavery that they had just left behind. Theologically, Pentecost represented a new relationship with the Lord. He would be their God, and they would be his people, formed by an inextricable oath, an indissoluble bond that united them in good times and in bad. But that ancient feast of the Old Testament was brought to its fulfillment in the New, when the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles in the upper room. But remember, they were locked in the upper room because of fear. Fear of the world around them and its animosity towards these new Christians. Fear of themselves, the own shame that they experienced from having denied the faith in the face of opposition. Fear of God because they left him alone, abandoned him on Mount Calvary to die by himself. But the Holy Spirit descends into that place of fear and brings about something totally new. No longer are they subject to the cycles of times and seasons. No longer are they slaves to oppressive forces from without, be they Egyptians, Romans, or Jews, or those oppressive forces from within, the sense of shame from their weaknesses. No longer is the relationship with God to be forged by a covenant written on stone, but a covenant written upon their human hearts. No longer slaves, but sons. The Holy Spirit alighted upon the apostles. It alighted upon weak men and made them strong. And those strong men then went out and made hard times good. The members of the greatest generation have or are now passing away. Will a like generation take its place? For how long or for what must we wait? It was dark and difficult times that created strong men and women. Those strong men and women then went out and made hard times good. Dark times have once again found us. It does us no good to think back on the good times of old, those that are already in our past. It does us no good to sit on our hands or bite our lips, waiting for good times to come yet again. We have been made for times such as this, times in which darkness has returned, not because of wars or depression, though those still exist, but from a more grievous and insidious enemy that is attacking us. Those who speak with confused voices about what is life, about morality and sexuality, woke ideologies that threaten to rot our humanity from within, promising advances in humanity, but instead delivering only widespread destruction. There may have been a time when a spirit of patriotism, determination, and commitment brought about changes in the times and changes in the men. But those changes were temporary. We now need a new spirit. We need a Holy Spirit that is going to descend to bring about changes that will endure, changes that will renew the face of the earth. But those changes and that very spirit needs to be embodied in the lives of the faithful. It needs to become incarnate, enfleshed once again. That spirit comes with a gift of courage. Courage is not the absence or the abolishment of fear. Courage is rather the overcoming of fear, to do that which is good, that which is necessary, that which will bring about a positive change. It is that courage that frees us from fears. Whatever fears keep us locked in the upper room in silence and out of sight. Fears of what other people might say or think. Fears of my own weaknesses and inabilities. That courage allows us to step out and to live our faith boldly, to preach it and proclaim it powerfully and even proudly. It takes courage for men and women to die on the battlefield for the sake of freedom. But we have found ourselves on a battlefield once again with a new threat to our freedom. How hard must times become, and how weak the men and women, until another greatest generation rises up, not determined by their birth, but by their rebirth in the fire of the Spirit.